What is happening out there, Rotoscouts basketball fans? Welcome to a Wednesday show, gang. Happy hump day, whoever's out there. Kind of a short notice show here at the end of the day. Was struggling to get the dashboard together. Those of you who have been here before will notice we've got some colored arrows now. Trying to put together a little bit of a reflection of sim results without giving away the farm with other people's ownership and that kind of a thing. So that's what these new arrows are reflecting. Had to wrestle with a few things behind the scenes. Took forever today to put the projections together, but we're finally here. I appreciate everybody who's here. The goal of this show is not going to be to go off at the exact same time as the Awesemo Live Before Lock show every single day. I know those guys are on right now, so I appreciate all of you guys who are here with me. But typically, if you weren't here yesterday, we did a co-show with the guys from Acemind, and I was saying I'm going to aim for like 3-4 o'clock shows, somewhere in that range, maybe even 2 some days. Just try and thread the needle between like a morning and an afternoon show where there's, occupied time slots otherwise. Figure we can slot in there. We can do it as a strategy show, and that way I'm a little bit freed up toward lock in that last crucial hour to catch any updates. Fortunately today, and I am going to get us out of here by like 6:15-ish, because I do want to have that at least like 45 minutes to be on top of projections and news and everything. But we're dealing with opening night, a somewhat stable environment. And I know they played last night. My Knicks were a complete disaster. Hopefully your DFS night went better than the New York Knicks night did. Mine certainly didn't. Only played a couple of lineups, but they were fairly Knicks heavy. I think the entire industry was riding the Knicks there for a while. That's how you get, I think it was solo winners on both sites, right? Despite it being a 2-game slate, which is pretty impressive for that to happen. So something went sideways when that happens. It was a funky slate. Hopefully we get a little bit more grounded with this one. But we've got a lot to talk through. 10 gamer up. Starting with some of the injuries, we'll do these real quick because, again, it's not too shaky right now. The big piece that's kind of hanging over the slate, and I say big just because he's a big name, he's a highly projected guy. It's not really coming up like crazy for me anyway, I don't think. But Zion Williamson, currently questionable and did not go through shoot-around. Yeah, you can see I got 10% of them on FanDuel. I got 10.6% on DK. So these are arranged. There's 5 different arrow directions, and then the colors behind it, kind of grade the same way, but those are 2 different grading scales so that you can see the arrow is kind of against the projection there, and then it's a degree kind of a thing. So you can see the straight down hard red arrow means we got a lot less of Zion than the field. I think I've got him under by a couple of points to where some other people might have him. But he's the big question mark. Probables for today: Timmy Hardaway Jr., Giannis, Lonzo's available, Dalen Terry's available, Grayson Allen and Damian Lee are both probable. Questionables: Isaiah Jackson, Josh Green, Steven Adams, Jose Alvarado, and then DeJounte Murray is questionable, but he did go through shoot-around. Seems like he's going to play. Big major impact if Zion doesn't go, just kind of goes directly downstream to Herb Jones and Daniel Theis. And most specifically, the guy I'd be interested in, I think, is Theis. Just would pick up a couple more minutes. I think I've got him in mid-20s. I want to say 26 off the top of my head, somewhere in there. We'll see him in a second. But it would pick up, some additional minutes for a guy who is a decent enough per minute player at a cheap price. So that's one to keep an eye on for sure. And then to run through the quick out list just because it's fun, because first day of the season, all of these guys are already out. Aja Thompson, Bojan Bogdanovic, Daron Sharp, Trendon Watford, Cody Zeller, Max Strus, RJ Barrett, Bruce Brown, Kelly O, Chris Middleton, Joel Embiid, Paul George, 2 huge ones there. Mark Williams, Trey Murphy, Jaren Jackson Jr., G.G. Jackson. So Triple J and Double G are both out. Vince Williams Jr., Isaiah Collier, Shaden Sharp, Matisse Thybulle, Robert Williams III, Josh Okogie, Mo Bamba, Kawhi Leonard, and P.J. Tucker. Kawhi, obviously a biggie for the Clips at the end of the night as well. That's your ins and your outs for today. A quick Vegas board here. Indy and Detroit, 235 points on the board. 5 points Indy favored by 5 in Detroit. Not a bad game with 2 reasonable middle of the board type totals and some talent on either side. I think that's one we can talk about a little bit. We're going to go position by position like usual, by the way. Just kind of look at some of the numbers, the percentages, talk about the guys' values and how they came up in the sims against the slate. So we might not zero in specifically on like, hey, this game environment and like hammer on those things. Some shows we might, some shows we won't. 10 games with only a little while to get through it. I'm going to try and do that here and then just talk players and plays through the rest of the slate. So medium strength game environment there, and a 5-point total, 5-point spread, not completely terrible. Brooklyn at Atlanta. Atlanta favored by 6.5 at home against what is a piecemeal, ugly-looking Brooklyn team. I wouldn't be surprised if they had successful nights, or at least for like DFS purposes, a couple successful pieces here and there on certain nights. And tonight could maybe be one of them with one of their top-end scorers, but not a lot to love about that Brooklyn team. Trey, really the big piece popping off the top of my head as far as projection goes, and then we'll look at some of the exposures on the Atlanta side. But that one's coming in 223, another kind of mid-board with Atlanta pulling a pretty significant advantage in terms of the implied team totals. The Bucks, the Sixers, 3.5 point spread in that one. Bucks favored on the road. Again, a couple major injuries, obviously, for Philly. Bucks probably going to coast their way through that one. Kind of surprised it's not actually a little bit bigger than 6.5, honestly, but Giannis was technically probable. So 224 point total there. Definitely interesting meat on the bone to go with that one. Cleveland and Toronto, a lot to work with here. I know Emmanuel Quickly's getting a lot of love. Scotty Barnes looked pretty good projection-wise. Decent amount to work with on both sides in this game. 225.5 point total. Both teams pulling their weight, but Cleveland favored by 6.5 on the road is not nothing. There is a little bit of an appreciable gap there. They've got the better overall team. Toronto is just kind of more full of guys that are a little bit cheap for maybe their role tonight, or a little bit maybe under-owned for their role tonight. Orlando and Miami, completely ugly, 208 total. Just a 2-point spread, so they're expecting a competitive game. Maybe they claw their way to like 220s, but, these totals are a guideline. We're looking for the upward trajectory games, not the ones that might barely scrape their way to 220, and that would be putting a lot on top of a Vegas total here. Pieces, maybe. We'll see how they come up against the Sim, but not an appealing game whatsoever there with a 208 point total, lowest by a mile on the slate. And what's that? It's 17 points lower than like anything else. 15 points, the 223 up there. So that is an ugly, ugly game. Charlotte and Houston, definitely some pieces to work with there. Houston favored by 8 at home, 229.5 point total, one of the top end games on the board. Nothing creeping into the 230s right now, but that one might get there. The Memphis and Utah game maybe creeps up by another point and gets there. So we are dealing with kind of a mid-type slate for a 10-gamer, but that's also kind of reflecting a little bit of, we saw it last night with some low totals. Those are good defensive teams, not the Knicks from defending the 3 last night, but those are decent teams. We saw those come in as, relatively, I don't want to say low scoring, because obviously the Celts went off and the Knicks were, at a decent total. But it seemed like there's a little bit of reflection in these game totals of first day of the season, getting things together kind of action. So there's some in here that could definitely trend over, and I do think that the Charlotte-Houston one is one of them. We'll definitely talk about some pieces from that one. Chicago, New Orleans, I mentioned the potential missing pieces from New Orleans that could have a pretty major impact on the slate. New Orleans favored by 5.5 right now, 226.5 point total. Makes both sides look at least playable. There's not a ton I love from Chicago. A lot of underperforming types on that team. I think Josh Giddey might have come up a little bit interesting in the Sims. We'll give him a look. We'll give the rest of that game a look, of course. Probably more usable pieces on the New Orleans side. Memphis and Utah, as mentioned. Memphis already missing a number of pieces, but they've got some of their high-end stuff. Utah, playable team and definitely an appealing total here with a fairly close point spread. So 2.5 points, 229 point total. Those things go together pretty nicely. The next closest game is the 2-point spread there in the completely awful 208 point game. Everything else a little bit further away. So if you're looking for just, the hard-fought contest, not that everything rides on that, but that definitely can feed upside from time to time, and it'll at least keep both teams competitive most of the time, where if you get a blowout, obviously we lose some fourth quarter run with some of these guys from time to time. So always something to at least keep in the back of your mind. That's a solid game environment in Memphis and Utah. Phoenix and the Clippers would be a better game if the Clippers weren't a little bit banged up with Kawhi out, but definitely some pieces from the Phoenix side, at least coming in around their typical averages that are at least that are star power level type guys that we can talk through. And then Golden State and Portland around things out, a 222 point total. Golden State favored by 6. Usable pieces and parts on the Golden State side, a little bit less so on Portland. Some of the obvious names still with Golden State definitely going to have some appeal. It's a little bit of a changed team, but definitely worth looking at up at the top of the board. We'll see how the value plays from that team come out. And that's it. That's it up and down. Looks like we got about 20 people here hanging out. Appreciate you guys. Hit the like button when you get a chance. Hit the subscribe if this is your first time here. If you've never subscribed before, tell a friend if you get a chance. Tell them to jump on, subscribe, and then mute notifications and never have to worry about it again. Just trying to pump the channel up to 1,000 subscribers before we get to the holidays, to the new year. Would make me feel good about myself. Would make all you guys feel good for helping me get there. Little holiday spirit, little, bringing people together in these crazy, crazy times. So get in there and click the subscribe button. If you're feeling adventurous, jump over to Rotoscouts.com if you want access to all of these projections. And yeah, I know that you can see them on the screen. And if you're sitting there and you're passionately, fervently writing them down, congratulations, you've beaten my less than $1 paywall for today. Maybe one day I'll block them out, but for right now, I'm leaving them up there so we can talk through them intelligently. But access to every single sport: baseball, basketball, football, and hockey right now. No hockey slate tonight. It's just another one-gamer, so no projections up for tonight. Football projections will go live tomorrow. Access to all of those. Every one of those sports. $1 a day, less than $1 a day. I got to stop saying $1 a day. It's less than $1 a day on our plans. So check them out. Weekly, monthly, quarterly plans available. A decision is entirely based on how frequently you want to pay. So check those out, and that'll give you access to all the projections and content here. And away we go. Coming up on 5:26. Like I said, gonna try and have us out of here 6:15. If I can do it by 6 o'clock, so much the better. We do have a lot to talk about. I just want to be freed up as much as I can for that hour before lock. And again, if you weren't here at the beginning of the show, this usually won't be this time of day. I'm going to try and push it earlier by like 2 hours. Keep it between the 3 and 4 o'clock window, maybe the 2 and 4 o'clock window, somewhere in that range, so that I'm, one, not butting heads with existing shows, making it easier for you guys to absorb more, and 2, just because I think it slots in better so that I'm free to handle projections and everything in the last hour and keep you guys up to date immediately when things change, rather than waiting for me to wind down a show when we all know I can just talk and talk and talk like this. Let's get into the slate. All right, so we're going to go position by position. Right now, this is sorted by DK, just raw projections here. If you're unfamiliar, FanDuel over here on the left where it's blue, DK over here on the right where it's green up in the top. Some stats off to the side over here. This black one is your dividing line between your FanDuel, your DK. We've got some stats in the middle that are just kind of, well, they're not quite universal. This is games played, minutes per game, which is universal, but then this one goes to the FanDuel points per minute because I'm a moron and I put that column in the wrong spot. Actually, it's because I built this when I was only talking about FanDuel. But and then usage and a couple other stats off this way. And then if we need them, we can dig in to additional statistical analysis. But let's pull it up by top 150 exposure. And I shouldn't do it by FanDuel because more you guys care about DraftKings. I'm going to go out on a limb. Some differentiated plays. KPJ didn't come up, but it doesn't look like it really matters. Ricky Council didn't come up, but it doesn't look like it really matters. Neither of those guys showing any kind of value at their low-end salaries and 10, 12-minute projections. Same thing happened with Taj. Doesn't look like Taj came through correctly, so we're going to just ignore those three guys for right now and talk through the rest of these guys. And I wanted to go positions. Now, again, I shouldn't be sorting by FanDuel. Bear with me. First solo show. Got to get back in the swing. It was fun with Blaine yesterday. If you guys weren't here, we did a co-show with me and the Acemind guys. So it was a fun time. It was fun getting back in the swing of like actually having somebody bouncing questions and dialogue off me. Trying not to cut somebody off when I just want to talk. All right, so getting into our point guard situation. Manuel quickly off the top of the board, showing the strongest returns in the sim, 65% of the top 150. That's up above what the field projection that went in here was. I think that he is projected in kind of that range on some other sites. But should have clear path to plenty of minutes. I've got him at 34. He's got upside for a couple beyond that. We've certainly seen him play that much. Good enough. Fantasy score, 1.07 per minute on DraftKings, 1.03 per minute on FanDuel. And we know that he's capable of cracking ceiling scores. So I don't mind that play on DK. For 79 on FanDuel, he's not quite the fit. He does slot into both positions at least. You get him point guard and shooting guard on the FanDuel slate. Right now we're selected point guard eligible players via DraftKings positioning. So forgive me while I stumble over some of the multi-position guys that do and don't pop up across sites. That's something we always just have to deal with. But he gains some flexibility. You can see he's not a terrible play. We did get him 26% of the time in the top 150. He's a 1.03 FanDuel per minute player. Has the same opportunity, but it doesn't show quite the strongest volume. 5.5 value score there, under 5 value score here. So the 26% that we got is slightly an undercut to the field. That's down slightly that way. And yellow is telling us it's not the extreme undercut that, say, Steph Curry gave us here. It's just 10% on FanDuel. Not the extreme undercut that we got on Dennis Schroeder at just 12%, but it is an undercut. Looks like we came up even-ish around Marcus Smart, and there's a range in each of these, right? So it doesn't mean I got exactly 43.3 because this is horizontal. Or, I mean, that is what I got. It doesn't mean that the public ownership is 43.3. I'm just trying to hide the ownership numbers that I used there because they're not mine. So we did get right around the field on Marcus Smart on the FanDuel slate. Same thing on DK, about 43% on FanDuel is pretty significant. 28.6% on your DraftKings slate. Again, great game environment there. Starters minutes, 32 minutes for a 0.92 per minute player, 0.94 on DraftKings when he checks in at just 5,900, 5,500 on FanDuel. Not a bad value option, not a bad like middle of the board guy to just plug in with a little bit of ceiling. Maybe not like your highest ceiling guy overall. But he's a good player who is a defensive whiz who can create some havoc, getting his hands on the ball, accrue some additional fantasy points beyond just scoring. He's a decent facilitator, 21.1% assist rate. So not a bad option. Freddie VanVleet, not really showing killer value. Same thing with LaMelo. Neither one of those guys really crushing value, but LaMelo's putting up a good overall raw projection. I have no issues with going to LaMelo. I've got him projected at 32.5 minutes. He's a 1.37 FanDuel, 1.42 DraftKings per minute guy. On DraftKings, we got to substantially more of LaMelo. 18% in our top 150. Checks in somewhere in the range of the field. I think that makes some sense. But he's a super high-end player. He costs 88 at the point guard position over there. That's a superstar. I mean, you can always press a little bit more gas on a superstar if they come in, under $9,000 on DraftKings, in the mid nines and below on FanDuel. Just a matter of price against ownership and how he fits. But one of the players with one of the higher raw projections on the slate, and honestly, one of the players with a higher just raw scoring ceiling on the slate. He's one of the better per minute options you've got. At the guard spot, he is the highest based on last year's numbers, the 1.42. That's your highest per minute guy. Next highest is Tyrese. He's all the way down here. He actually didn't land in any lineups in the top 150. Across the 50,000 that ran through the sim, of course he was in there. But we didn't get to a lot of Tyrese in the top 150 there. So as far as your per minute guys, LaMelo, head and shoulders above on DK. Not really relevant to the FanDuel slate at the higher price. 9,700 is significantly higher. We got him a little bit. If I had stretched this to a top 500 lineups, this might have been 5-ish% just based on that raw projection fitting into point guard. But he's less relevant on FanDuel at the higher price. Karis LeVert, that looks pretty significant. Looks like it's relatively even with the field, though. So 64% on FanDuel. Very, very meaty, but obviously we're showing an extreme value number there. Remember when I said Giddey came up a lot on FanDuel? That turned out to be true. 65-ish% down there. 5.76 value rating. That's probably your highest guard value number. Actually, that's a weird one. The raw projection just ate up Cole Anthony there, I guess. But it looks like we got a ton of Giddey and we got a ton of Karis LeVert. LeVert's on this board, even though he's a small forward shooting guard. On DraftKings, he's a point guard shooting guard. So he's on this board right now. But that's good news for our positioning on the FanDuel slate. You do get both him and Giddey at the shooting guard position, but you get a little bit of flexibility with Giddey falling into point guard as his alternative position and LeVert at small forward as his alternative position. Both those guys are looking like very good chalk on the FanDuel slate. Giddey a 1.14 per minute performer. LeVert 1.03. On DraftKings 1.04. He just came in at 12%. LeVert right around his projected number. And then Josh Giddey, 2.67, minimal exposure to Giddey at 7,100. He's 63 with multi-position on FanDuel. DraftKings 71, just point guard, not quite as effective. Just looking at some of the numbers. If we're looking for some good 3-point shooters on high volume, try and nudge some scoring ceilings, Tyrese is certainly going to fit that role. We didn't get a ton of them on either site, 5% FanDuel, 10% DraftKings. But definitely a bomber who, with his buddies missing, is going to be shooting. And one of the higher overall raw projections, 45 DraftKings points. Higher than Steph Curry by 3 points. Steph, I think we know, living legend as far as 3-point shooting. Took 12 a game basically last year. Made nearly 41% of them. The two highest volume shooters in that little group right there. You get 9 threes a game last year out of LaMelo. He was a 35% shooter, though. So it's a little bit of a slip as far as the actual makes. He was making 3.1 a game. Steph was making 4.8, and you were getting essentially the same makes out of Tyrese Maxey on his shooting. So a little bit to work with as far as the 3-point shooters from that group of highly projected guys and high exposure guys at the point guard position. And then obviously at that position, you get some decent facilitators and some guys who are creators of fantasy points rather than collectors of fantasy points. As we're looking down our DK exposures, it does really thin out pretty quickly. That's 172% of our point guard exposure on DraftKings, with a little bit of multi-position obviously in there. Goes between Quickly, Smart, Van Vliet, LaMelo, Karis LeVert, Steph Curry, Tyrese Maxey. Nope. Yeah, Tyrese Maxey is in there. CJ McCollum is the first guy not double digits. CJ, I don't know, 1.12 DraftKings points per minute for 6,900 is an okay buy. You can see it's slightly below 5. 5 is typically like our magic number that we're looking for in that value column. He does have multi-position. I think it's perfectly reasonable to expect around 35 DraftKings points, 32, 35, something like that from him tonight. We got him a little bit less than the field, 8.67%. You can see that's a little further off in the relative scale. So the field probably in the, maybe double that kind of a range. I'm perfectly comfortable with being under the field on CJ, especially with DeJounte Murray there and potentially eating some of his opportunities. If Zion doesn't go, maybe just not that they're nearly the same position, but maybe just on the nature of how they're going to play the game, maybe CJ picks up a little bit of additional usage in that kind of a look. But I don't really love the player. Same thing on FanDuel, 8%. Schroeder projecting 30 minutes. 5 plus value on both sides, 30 fantasy points on both sides plus. He's just popular, and I think this is just kind of bouncing off the popularity. We did get him, 12.67% on FanDuel in the top 150, 8% in the top 150 on DraftKings. I just expect that that's kind of bouncing off some Dennis Schroeder popularity. Let's see. Yeah, so to put a scale on that, so that you guys know, like this direct down red arrow is telling us essentially the 8% Schroeder that I got here was bouncing off of a projection that's it's like 3 times that ish, a little bit less than 3 times that, just so you guys can kind of put a scale in your heads as far as what these numbers mean. That's on DraftKings. Same thing. I mean, the scale works the same way. The numbers are obviously different on FanDuel. So Schroeder, I do think, does have upside, can give you value. He's also a player I feel like I've just never, ever succeeded with. Every time I've put him in my lineup, he's underperformed and vice versa. 0.90 per minute on FanDuel, 0.93 on DraftKings. So, you temper expectations to a degree. Jaden Ivey just looking like who he is. Once we get to this level, the single-digit guys, a lot of just looking like who they are guys. So out of that group, Jaden Ivey not exactly going to run off and grab a ton of exposure. We got 7%. He came in slightly below the field. FanDuel, same thing, slightly below at 11%. Maybe a little bit more important for the 59 over there multi-position, but not a critical piece. Cade, decent median projection, but just a 4.6 on the value scare. A little better on the DraftKings value for 86 at the point guard only. Came up about even with the field on Cade. About even with the field on Tyus Jones, a little bit below it for Donovan Mitchell, who is a big player. 42 DraftKings points, 40 FanDuel points in the raw sense. Just got 2% of them in the top 150 on FanDuel. Just got 6.6% of them in the top 150 on DraftKings. Obviously, another player who, despite kind of falling by the wayside, the Sim's not telling us don't have any, but it's definitely telling us he's not going to be crazy highly owned, and you probably want less of him. But he is one of those breakouts, any given slate could have a breakout type game, a star caliber type game. and just eradicate the slate here. So there is appreciable ceiling on stars like Donovan Mitchell on basically any slate. TJ McConnell just kind of is who he is. Doesn't look like we got him on FanDuel. Doesn't look like he was all that relevant. 4.67% for 4,800 on DraftKings. He's a per-minute monster, but we don't really have that opportunity today. I gave him 20. Just checking in at like 24. DraftKings points 1.29 per minute was his season average last year. I think I've got him slightly below that, if memory serves. I'm not doing math in my head right now. James Harden, another guy, just good, decent raw projection from a veteran with obvious upside and presumably going to be carrying the scoring load for the foreseeable future for the Clippers. But doesn't really land. 9,300, 4.67% of them in the top 150 on FanDuel. Same thing basically exposure-wise on DraftKings. Harden last year was at 1.12 FanDuel points per minute. Year before, he was at 1.24. I did kind of lean back more toward the year before number, but it looks like I'm being more conservative about it than other places might be. So I think we're okay there. If he gets a little bit overexposed by the field, I think that's a good spot to undercut. You can have some if you're building 150, 5% sounds about right. And he is a player with a true ceiling on him. He's going up against some of his old buddies in that Phoenix rotation as well. So there's a little bit of attack mode there for Harden, believably. I apologize, guys. I've been talking just like nonstop since we started. I didn't even say hi to anybody. Ducking's here. Somebody else was here first. Male Nurse's Rock was here. Male Nurse's Rock was the first one in the door. Appreciate you, buddy. I was hoping I'd have a show today, too. Cujo's here. Andy's here. Solid Picks is here. Colin Sutherland. Power's here. Power's answering a question that Solid Picks asked. Solid Picks was asking, I play FanDuel. What should I prioritize as opposed to DK? Power says, on FanDuel, I prioritize guard wings. On DK, I prioritize guard centers, as in dual positionality. But at the end of the day, everything is minutes, matchup, and salary. Yeah, that's very true, Power. The thing I would add to that, though, is that center is kind of a priority, at least in this lineup. Am I paying up for a center, or am I taking a value center, and is that differentiated from the field? It's an important question to ask of that position. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the most important position on a FanDuel slate, but it is one that I at least try to prioritize with that question, because I do think the one bite at the center position on FanDuel does tend to inform the rest of the lineup, right? If you're getting one expensive guy at that spot, you've got X to spend. If you're saving money at that spot, you've got Y to spend, and you can reach to bigger positions at your guards and your wings. So hopefully that makes sense. Got to get this win is here. Only winners, please. Haven't come across Yabusel. We'll see if we get there. 5:43. So, according to my theory, we're done in a half hour. This is going to go well. Dame came up a little bit on FanDuel, 8.67 on FanDuel. I'm in the mode where now I'm looking for some differentiated exposures across DraftKings and FanDuel so that we don't miss any crucial FanDuel plays. The biggest one by far is Josh Giddey. We got to Karis LeVert a little bit on DraftKings. 12% against our 60+ on FanDuel is just a completely different play. But Giddey, we only got 2 and change %, and that's like dead even with the field on DraftKings. So Giddey on FanDuel stands out, and Karis LeVert is coming in closer to the field, it looks like, than Giddey is. So he's probably, Giddey, our biggest outlier against the field right now. Could come back to earth, but he's coming off a good year, 1.14 FanDuel points per minute last season. Got him in that range for today. New environment here, presumably gonna be a featured scorer. Year before he was 1.13. I've actually got him below those numbers. I'm at 1.10. Isaiah Jackson is out per Power. We'll get that updated. Yeah, Wiseman is on the board a little bit. I believe he's still not on the FanDuel slate, though. So that's a DK only. We'll get there. But looking for a couple other outliers. Ja Morant, 7%. Kobe White, 10% as far as top 150 exposure on FanDuel. But you can see, while we got to both of those guys a little bit, that is below the field pretty significantly on both. Kind of a mid-grade way below. Right? The backbone, the background color there is graded. Like you can see, this dark red straight down on Ben Simmons is worse against the field than these are. So we got to a little bit more relative to the field of Kobe White and Ja Morant, where we're way further away from the field with Ben Simmons. I want really no actual part of Ben Simmons until proven wrong about that, and I think I've been okay with that stance for a while now. But we did get 2% of him on FanDuel, which is not nothing. 6,100. He was a 1.11 performer in his 15 games last year, and we're very, very proud of him for that. He did not come up on DraftKings. Everybody that I'm talking about right now basically didn't come up on DraftKings. Dame, 8.67 on FanDuel, a little bit of an undercut to the field. Doesn't look like a significant enough piece today against Philly, 35 minutes. You could easily see Dame coming out of that if they're up, fairly significantly in the fourth quarter and just, not getting all the way up to a 35-minute projection, 32, 33, that kind of a day. Obviously, it's Dame, so we could still get there on that kind of a day, but just doesn't look like a priority on this slate. And really nobody else jumps out. Everybody down this way is zeros. Power saying I'm going mostly value center today because the guards are super strong on this slate, although Şengün is the nuts. So I do like the strength of the guards, especially some of the ones that we've talked about here. That'll be a good little segue into... See, I should just do guards instead of... And that's... Actually, let me change that. Let me catch who we didn't talk about in here, because there's a lot of guards on the board, to your point, on both sides. And we were talking sorted to just point guard, but we were talking about basically everybody across those positions. It's annoying with the differentiated positions. It really is. So let's see. Guys who are shooting guard only, Colin Sexton on DraftKings came up pretty significantly, 5.5 on the value scale. Solid projection for a 1.17 per minute performer. He landed in 57% on DraftKings. That looks like it's a well above the field. 38% of the top 150 fielded Desmond Bane in either the shooting guard or small forward. I have a suspicion that most of those would land in the small forward between the positions, just looking at how many shooting guards are available here. So probably got to lean into Des Bane in the small forward spot. But another guy who should benefit in Memphis, him and Marcus Smart, kind of right next to each other here. You probably see them paired a little bit. 1.19 per minute performer on DraftKings last year. He's a 1.14 performer on FanDuel. We got him 31% of the time, basically level with the field. Sexton, we really didn't get on FanDuel. He's 67 over there. Pretty significant price hike compared to the other site. He does have point guard eligibility, but it doesn't really seem to matter that much. We got him, but this is fairly far below the field. So 16% is, it's definitely not a player to rule out, and he does have a ceiling. Again, 1 point. Anybody who's over 1 is going to give you at least a shot at a ceiling, and once you're getting above 1-1, you're really building up, and if you're a primary ball handler, you're building up even further. Freddie VanVleet. Did I talk about Freddie VanVleet? I had it sorted to point guard, but I don't remember saying anything about him. He came in even with the field 24.67% on DK. Doesn't look like he hit it all on FanDuel at 8,000. Point guard only on both sites. 74 on DraftKings. That makes some sense. 5.2 in the rating, in the value mark. 4.7 in the FanDuel one. LaMelo, I know we touched on. Gary Trent is a big piece on both sites. Actually, more so on FanDuel. Sorry, DraftKings. You miss out on the Gary Trent play today. He's just okay on your site. 5,200 shooting guard and small forward. We got him 16% of the time in the top 150. That's right around the field's number. Since it's slightly yellow shaded, if I had to guess, that would be maybe slightly below the field, but right at the field, essentially. On FanDuel, we did get him more than the field. It's not straight up and it's not dark green, but that is an appreciable amount beyond the field. 42.6% exposure in our top 150. Pretty concentrated ownership on some of these guys on your FanDuel slate. John Conchar did manage to work his way into 11% of DraftKings lineups because he's a value guy at just 3,300. I've got him at 18 minutes. 0.78 DraftKings points per minute last season. Not the highest end performer in the world. And definitely one of the spots where it's a little bit murky. Played 21 minutes a game over 55 games last season. So I think there's upside beyond the 18, but there's probably also downside. I think I've got him at a higher per minute, but a lower overall minute total than some of the competition. Probably evens out. Maxi, we did. Zach LaVine, not a fan. 10%, that's fine. 10% DraftKings, 5% FanDuel. No issues with it. But if I'm going to that team, it's probably for Josh Giddey. And that's really only on FanDuel. Maybe some of the bigs will come through as we look through it, but I'm not a huge LaVine fan. He underperformed last season pretty dramatically. 0.94 per minute, 0.98 on DraftKings. No love. Those guys have point guard. A couple more guys down here. Norm Powell picking up just 6% on DK. He's 5,800 over there. He's 5,100 on FanDuel. That's where his value lies. 5.46 on the value scale. Landed in 60% of our FanDuel lineup. So we've got several very significant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spots across a point guard, shooting guard, small forward, shooting guard, small forward, shooting guard only, point guard only. So I think we can get all 5 of those guys. Right? Am I crazy? It's 1 point guard, 2 point guard. Right? You go Giddey, Smart in the point guards, Trent obviously in the shooting guard, and then pick your poison with Karis LeVert and Norm Powell as far as shooting guard, small forward. So interesting with those 3 guys coming up that significantly on your FanDuel slate. On DraftKings, again, Powell 5,800 didn't really hit the board all that hard. You can play him there, but he's just kind of just another guy. Definitely has upside though. Going to be expected to do some scoring in LA, at least while Kawhi's out. 0.81 per minute last year, 0.77 on FanDuel. So medium strength play, but he's cheap on FanDuel, and I think we do want to get to him over there. And you get him end of the night too. Always important. You want to, it's not a direct rule of you have to have something from the last game. That's a silly way to put it. The correct way to put, I think, that thing that people ask about a lot is you want to leave yourself the most opportunity to respond to late breaking news and changes in those late games. And the only real way to do that is to have a couple pieces, if not from the latest game, from the 10 p.m. games, let's say, or the 9 p.m. games, whatever's the latest on the slate. Again, tonight, I really don't think that matters as much. We're going to have most of our news, knock on wood, well around lock, let's say. Downboard here, let's see if we can find some of these guys. Everybody in this range, just kind of mid on DraftKings. The interesting one is Kelly Oubre Jr., 32 minutes projected for a .92 guy on both sites last season. We got to him 20.6% of the time on FanDuel, which is not nothing exposure, but you can see fairly significant gap from the field. So I'm intrigued by that as far as something that's coming in below the field on FanDuel, and it's coming in below the field on DraftKings in the same way at a lower number. So the relative ownership on DraftKings is just lower overall for the public. He's 6,400 over there, 6,400 against the FanDuel cap, obviously a smaller impact there. So definitely one to watch as far as what your exposure against the field looks like. Maybe one that the field's getting a little carried away with. Bradley Beal, totally playable, 5% exposure on DraftKings in the top 150. Didn't get him at all on FanDuel. 74 on FanDuel versus 67 on DraftKings. Definite little price difference there. He's a little bit better, 1.02 versus 0.99 DraftKings to FanDuel too. So a little bit of an advantage on Beal on DraftKings, but not a significant piece. Looks like we're dead at the field at about 5%. McConnell we talked about. Shooting guard, point guard eligible. Another shooting guard only guy, Eric Gordon. Just 1% minimal. Doesn't look like Darius Garland we didn't really touch on FanDuel. It does look like he's a little bit more relevant. 68 over there versus 73 on DraftKings. Got him 14% of the time. Basically looks like it's about level with field expectations. 4% and under the field a little bit on him on DraftKings for Darius Garland. Everybody else, we talked about several of these guys. Anybody with significant numbers on them. Again, Ben Simmons, no real appeal for me. Dame. Tyrese, I mentioned Tyrese. We kind of breezed by him. He didn't come up at all on DK. 42 DraftKings points for 9,300. It's a little bit out of line. 1.41 points per minute. I mean, he's a tremendous per minute performer. You can get there, but wasn't landing in sims all that effectively. 3 more points. Does he land more effectively in sims against guys, like Maxey for 9,000 projected about 3 points higher. We got to him 10% of the time. Does look like we're extracting a little bit more as far as values or like mid-board types at the guard spots on DK though. Right? Nobody in the top 10 there across all the guard eligible players at both guard positions. Nobody in the top 10 by our sim exposure is above 8,800. The 88 is LaMelo. There's a couple guys in the 8s in there and a few in the 7s, but it's interesting that the guards are mathing out that way. A little bit different on FanDuel. But I think, again, it is probably leaning more guard, more value-oriented at guard on both sides. And that speaks to the Gary Trent, the Karis LeVert exposure, of course. Obviously, Norm Powell, Josh Giddey. Parallax, Phillies, Maxey, Gordon, Oubre, KJ Martin, and Drummond. Probably going to give KJ a little bit. This is why I need to get out of here in 21 minutes. Or 20 minutes. Going to probably give KJ a little bit more on that then. If he's in the starting lineup. I had him at 18. Probably goose that a little. We'll give it a look. Actually, appreciate that power, by the way. You're always quick with the news, buddy, and those are very, very helpful. That allows me to flag him in the other one so that I know who to look for after I get off of here. Because as I was joking with Blaine when we got off the show yesterday, he goes, now I got to build lineups and try and remember everything that we just said. And I was like, dude, I totally feel you. I get off these shows and I'm like, man, I made so many good points. I wish I had been listening to that show and not, this is me evaluating my own points. Good points or bad is for you to judge. But to me, I was like, hey, I made good points on there. The hell were they as I'm building my lineup? So it gets a little bit messy with remembering stuff, so definitely helpful when you guys mention the news so that I can flag it on the fly here. But let's keep rolling. I'm going to do all the forwards in one shot here. Again, there might be a couple guys FanDuel-wise that have center forward eligibility that don't make this list, but good enough for government work here. Santi Aldama, that's a monster. 5.6, I wasn't expecting that one. 5,800, it's got a decent projection on 5,000 on DraftKings. That's the explanation there. Power forward and center eligible. You've obviously got your util spot to work with on DK as well. It's a 0.94 per minute performer. Not a bad option at that price. I was just surprised that was the top name sorted by our top 150 exposure here. But got there significantly on DraftKings. Didn't get there really at all on FanDuel. Just at level with the field at 5% exposure. I think that makes sense for the additional elevated price there and with a lot of pieces to move around the board at power forward and center. Des Bain, we already talked about a little. We talked about him at some point. I don't know. 31% level with the field. On DraftKings, 38%, slightly higher than the field. 5.16 value rating against a 40 plus projection. Only 8,000 on DK, 79 on FanDuel. Surprised he's not showing a little bit more bounce on FanDuel, actually. He is a player that projects a little bit better on the DK slate, so there's that. 119 on DK last year versus 114 on FanDuel. So I guess that explains it away. Despite the slightly lower price difference, we're getting a little bit less performance there. He definitely came up on both sites. It's just I'm thinking about this sub 5 versus 5 and change. Caleb Martin right about 28% against the field on both sides. That's slightly over against what we ran in here on DK. Right about the field's level on FanDuel. 0.76 per minute last year, 0.77 on DraftKings, but some minute upside there. But actually, let me think through what I'm saying, because he's going to be another one that I'm going to flag because he's not in that starting lineup. All right, so we get Gordon, Maxey, Gordon, Oubre, Martin, Drummond. Maxey, Oubre, Gordon. So what I'm probably going to do is move some of Caleb's minutes to KJ. Just trade him between the Martins. Seems pretty straightforward. So I think Caleb takes a little bit of a dip here. Probably don't get him quite at this level. Giannis looks like Giannis, 8% on FanDuel in the top 150 is totally fine, and that means that you can mash that down a little bit more. That's slightly less than the field. If you want to get him around the field, I have no issues with it. He's clearly the highest ceiling player on the slate. He's offset by 8 or 9 fantasy points from everybody else. 56 on DraftKings. We got to him 25% of the time. That's more than the field on DK. I love that. Happy to get to Giannis in my life. The one thing is that maybe is concerning there is the idea of potential blowout if Milwaukee gets up and away from Philly. Millie versus Philly. Then you could see the Giannis's, the Dames of the world take a seat toward the end of the fourth quarter. But you're talking about a matter of a minute, and as I always like to say, if they do blow them out, those guys probably did something along the way. Tobias Harris in his new life in Detroit. 19% on DraftKings, basically level with the field. I wouldn't call him a priority play. Just under a point per minute last year. I've got him right in that same territory. I've got him 32 minutes, 32 and change. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I think he's 1.0 something. On FanDuel, 0.98 last season. He's below the field at 9% exposure in our top 150. Not a priority play. And honestly, coming off of that last season, how many times did we really actually get there with Tobias? It wasn't that many. Grant Williams under the field, 2% on FanDuel, much more significant ownership on DraftKings. 46 hundo over there. He's power forward and center eligible. Comes up with a 5+ value rating, basically even with the field's exposure around 18%. Same thing for Zaire Williams. Zaire coming in at a phenomenal value number, 5.96, probably the leading value number on DK. I don't think there were any 6s. Same value number, 5.96, that Gary Trent's getting on your FanDuel slate, if you want to put it in perspective. But the difference, Zaire Williams, 20-minute projection, and, it's right about what he averaged over 50 games last year, 51 games last year. The hope is he gets those 21 minutes, 0.81 FanDuel or DraftKings points per minute for 3,000 at the dead min, both forward spots. There's a little bit of meat on the bone there. I think getting him around the field and using him like the utility, the lever to gain upside that he is, I see him in that role. I don't think you go crazy with Zaire Williams here. Lauri Markkanen just coming up fine. 16% on FanDuel is level with the field. 17%, same thing on DraftKings. That's an appealing game environment. 7,800 at both forward spots on FanDuel. 75 both forward spots on DK. Definitely an interesting player to keep in mind as you're moving around parts at forward. Say you're stuck on... I've got Des Bane in that spot at 8,000, and I can't quite make it work. I want to get this other guy. I need to get Giannis into my lineup because I don't have a superstar in there. And, oh, wait, who's that lurking there? Lauri Markkanen, 7,500, 500 less. We got to him less. He's not the high-end play that Des Bane might be for 8,000 for 500 more. Des Bane in a vacuum is the better play, but Lauri Markkanen is totally playable in those same spots for less. And he does have very, very good upside. 1.21 DraftKings point per minute scorer last season. Anybody, again, in that range is going to be able to give you a ceiling score and win his position for the night, or be one of the top 2 in his position for the night. Conchar we talked about in the guard. Same thing with Gary Trent. Zion, if he plays, 10% on both sites. Below the field on FanDuel pretty significantly. Below the field, but not as significantly on DraftKings at 10.6. But I'm perfectly happy to forgo a banged up Zion. Like, even if he does play, to me that means that they feel like he's healthy and he's not going to risk re-injury. But if he's going to be a little bit limited, a little bit hesitant, and a little bit out of shape out there, possibly, put the words out of shape and Zion together, and those are concerning. Those don't go well together. Little value on Derek Jones. Another player from the Clips, putting him in around 30 minutes at 4,400. Should give him a little bit of value upside. 10% on FanDuel against the value number. It's below the field. Field's probably coming in, guessing high teens, 20-ish. So we're probably about half the field. Still got him, but definitely looks like he's a little overpopular for a 0.74 per minute player. I could see why. 14.6% usage last year. The idea that there could be a little bit of additional usage for him, a little bit of upside based on that, but not extreme, and definitely somebody I'm comfortable undercutting. On DK, you got him right around the field, 10.67% for 4,500. Similar, the exact same take. He's only a 0.73 per minute player over there. Not a runaway freight train of success, but our 10% is basically where the field had him, so that's fine. A little bit lighter than the field on both sites on Levine. I think I talked about him before, yeah. 10 on DraftKings, 5 on FanDuel. Evan Mobley, power forward and center eligible on both sides. Greatly prefer him as a power forward than a center on the FanDuel slate. He came up 26% of the time, basically level with the field over there. 8.6% of the time, a little bit under the field on DraftKings. It's the same thing for, looks like Cam Johnson in that next spot down. They came up the exact same amount, both slightly below the field. Johnson for 5,500, just another value guy, sub 5 in the value rating for a mid-board type projection in 30 minutes. He's just okay. He's definitely a capable enough player in real life. 0.92 per minute on DraftKings, 0.89 per minute on FanDuel. He's fine. He's a middle of the board, looks like who he is kind of a guy. Way less Jabari on DraftKings. Apparently the field's getting to Jabari Walker, the power forward spot for 33, and we are not. We got him 8.6% of the time. I shouldn't say not, but not nearly as much. Let me check that one. That's about, again, the field is 3-4 times higher than that number. 0.88 per minute. Orlando, Suggs, KCP, Franz Wagner, Banchero, and Wendell Carter. Claxton minutes limit per power. Am I missing the boat here with Jabari? I don't want to undercut too radically if he's... I know he's cheap. I think it's just the cheapness. You could negotiate for a little bit more. Half a point, if that makes a difference to you. I don't think that pushes him all of a sudden. Maybe it gets him to like 12, 15%. I don't think it pushes him above 30%, though, if I give it to him against the way the field's mathing out. I think that, based on what we're seeing here, Conchar, slightly better as a value play for the same price at 33. Zaire Williams, 3,000, maybe even better, coming in around the same projection. Got him around the field, but 18%. So between those three guys, definitely looks like Jabari came up as our least interesting value guy, and that's almost certainly a reflection of his low-end total, his low-end projection, low-end per minute mark against a 20-minute projection, and a lot of ownership. He didn't land in any FanDuel lineups whatsoever. You can see the difference, FanDuel to DraftKings. It's right there in the value number, right? 3 and change, below 3.5 against a 4,800 on FanDuel. He's not an asset at all over there. He's got a 5+ on DraftKings. So again, this is a guy who marks as a value play. It's just our sims are telling us get below where the field is getting to him, and more appropriate ownership level would be 8-10%, somewhere in there. It's important to understand what the sims are telling us. 608. Brandon Ingram, just 1% on FanDuel, just kind of an is who he is spot, I guess. 7,400 on DK. He's a little bit cheaper over there. Small forward only. 6 and change. 6.6% level with the field. A little bit under the field on Norm Powell. 6%. Way more of them. We talked about him already. Way more of them on FanDuel at 5,100. We got him 60% of the time. Kelly Oubre we talked about. Miles Bridges, another fairly high-end player. We got him basically level with the field at 5% on DK. 16% where he's more interesting for 7,500, which is a cheaper relative salary. Also both forward spots on FanDuel. Definitely more utility for him on FanDuel. He's more popular over there, so it looks like we're slightly above the field, but not even like, slight upward angle. So this is roughly level with the field while being slightly over. I'd say 18% of Miles looks just fine, but definitely a playable piece and a potential contributor on the FanDuel slate. Pascal Siakam, just under 5% exposure in our top 150, basically level with the field for 83 on DraftKings, both forward spots. On FanDuel, 24%, but that's actually lower than the field. So we did get him, and we got him fairly significantly against his 1.15 per minute mark. Solid projection, solid value rating, but this 24, 25-ish percent is a little bit below the field. Same thing with KD on a much lower mark, under 5% of him, and that's below the field's mark. Totally happy getting shares of KD if he's just a last man in star kind of a play, and you've already paid for upside and trajectory toward a ceiling score. But he's not ideal today. Just 2 and change on DraftKings, basically level with the field for 86. We got to some Kuminga. We got to some Banchero that we didn't really get on DraftKings. FanDuel, we got 12% Kuminga. That's below the field pretty significantly, it looks like, though. 11% Banchero, a little bit more level with the field. Neither of those guys was relevant for us in Sims on DraftKings, and it looks like we did come in below fairly significantly on Kuminga. Yeah, he's another one that's just kind of falling by the wayside against that ownership. It's a good public spot, but he ran against public ownership that's like 10 times that mark. So that's one of our bigger undercuts on the DraftKings slate. Talk Banchero. Kevin Love on FanDuel at 8,900 seems to be... Oh, that's Scotty Barnes. I was like, how the hell is Kevin Love projected for 45 points? My brain broke for a second there. Scotty Barnes makes a hell of a lot more sense. For all the same reasons that Quickly is going to benefit tonight, Scotty Barnes is going to benefit, and we've seen Scotty put up monster scores in this position before. 30+% ownership, a little bit ahead of the field on FanDuel. Looks pretty great to me. 89, both forward spots on that site. Power forward only on DraftKings, 89 as well over there. Didn't get him. Obviously is projected for a little bit of ownership, but doesn't look like a major factor on the DraftKings slate, despite pulling a 5+ in the value rating. Just kind of seems like he's getting boxed out by some of the other spendy options once you've gotten to that range. That's probably a little bit light. Patty Williams coming up on FanDuel 14% of the time, but again, that's below the field. We've got a sub-5 value mark, just a 21-point projection for the 0.76 per minute guy. Don't love it. No real love down here for anybody else. These are all single digits and zeros. Let's jump to center for our last few minutes, and then we're going to wrap up. Yeah, Giannis went through shoot around. I assume he's going to play. I'd be surprised if he doesn't. So these are reasons to talk about center, but it is a value-oriented center spot, Mamba, as you're pointing out on DraftKings especially. On DraftKings, Nick Richards checks in as starting center minutes, 28. I got him at 28, and he could play upwards of that possibly. He averaged 26 last year in a number of starts. But 60% of the field, 60% of the top 150, well ahead of the field. But 60% of the top 150 ended up with Nick Richards on DraftKings. Against a $5,500 cap as the one center on FanDuel, we got to him 0 times in our top 150. That's below the field, but not significantly because the field's not significantly exposed to him. But he's coming up as a big play on DraftKings right now, 0.89 per minute. Definitely looks interesting there. Santi Aldama also pulling a little bit of exposure. I mentioned him before, but he has center eligibility as well, so he's on this board also. But 5,000 for him, that's 1,000 difference between the two, so it's easy to turn in Nick Richards' direction. But you're getting a ton of ownership. That's 114% ownership across those two players, across two positions. That's significant. Brandon Clark is landing as a value play for 37 at the position. He's a 6+, so there are two 6+s on DraftKings, and they're both centers. So Clark is a different kind of play. He's only 3,700. He's only projected for 20 minutes. And if Aldama goes 31, how does that bounce off of Clark's minutes? We'll deal with that as it comes. But even if he goes a couple fewer minutes and this comes down to like a 5.5 value rating, I think he still pays to have some exposure to. He's 29% owned in our top 150. That's around the field's number that went into this sim. Grant Williams, another value center, 4,600. You do have Giannis here, who's center eligible on DK, but I would suspect that most of his shares landed at forward, given how many of these centers are value centers. 4,600 for Grant Williams across power forward and center, 18.67% of the popularity. On FanDuel, everybody that I talked about, plus Jakob Poeltl, all in single digits when it comes to our top 150. So we've got a play these guys on DraftKings, play these guys on FanDuel type situation right now. So that's fun. Pirtle did come up on the FanDuel slate, 7.33. By the way, various utilities and sites, NBA.com is one of them, and some other sites out there have gone in and added accents to a lot of these guys' names and changed some spellings around. So if you check your sheets and your auto-populating formulas and stuff, make sure that you've got the correct naming conventions in there, because there's, as usual, all sorts of changes. Guys like Shingun is coming up with accents on his name. Pirtle is one of those guys, and he also spells his name differently than this now. So definitely something to keep an eye out for. Don't just assume that because it worked last year, it'll work this year. So Pirtle playable on FanDuel at 7%. We got more of them at 13% on DraftKings, but that is kind of level with the field. A little bit less of them than the field on FanDuel. Daniel Tice, who I mentioned before, picking up minutes anyway, and if Zion doesn't play, there's more minutes there and probably trends up to in the 30 range. 11.3 in the top 150. Definitely level with the field, worth playing. 0.92 per minute performer for just 3,900 at the center spot. I wish he had power forward eligibility on FanDuel, but I think you can take that play at the center spot. If I'm building one lineup, he's probably not my choice, though. I'd probably just go with a little bit higher end of an option there. A little bit of a guy who's not necessarily riding on, does he get those 2-3 minutes or does he not? A 1.2 kind of a guy like is down in this territory. So I think he's just okay for lack of the power forward over there. On DraftKings, 12% as a $4,000 center only, but you got the util spot, came up around the field, a good value on the DK side as well. Miles Turner, sub 10% exposure in our top 150 on DraftKings, but 26% for just 7,700 across power forward and center on the FanDuel slate. A little bit more relevant on FanDuel at the same price against the relative cap numbers. Zubac, another guy with naming issues across different sites. 6,500 on FanDuel. We got him 10.6% of the time. Very solid value rating there. Yet another guy that, there are going to be buckets to go around in LA for the foreseeable future. He's a low usage, but fairly decent per minute output guy. 16.5% usage, but a 1.07 per minute FanDuel, 1.05 DraftKings player. Just, scrappy player under the boards, does a lot of work. 17.9% rebounding rate, a 67.1% true shooting rate last year. I know we didn't talk many NBA stats, but I was grasping for something to say about a player that we've known for quite a while now in Zubac. Şengün getting some buzz in the chat. Didn't really come up on DK. Just 2% exposed in the top 150. That's against... it's right about level with the field. So to put that one in perspective, we got him 2% of the time, and that yellow down arrow there represents a sub-3 projection, but higher than ours. So we really didn't get him much over there. Where we got him is FanDuel, right around 15%. I've got him at 32 minutes. There is upside there, a couple additional minutes. He's a fantastic per-minute player. 1.32 FanDuel, 1.33 DraftKings last year. I have no issues hitting the gas pedal a little bit more on Şengün, especially because he came up level with the field on the FanDuel slate. So since there's appreciable ceiling, and since maybe I've got him a little low with 32 minutes, if you give him another 2 minutes, he'd gain another into the 20s, let's say, exposure. So there's nothing at all wrong with doing that if you think that's what he's getting. I do have him at a higher per minute rate, though, just so bear that in mind. If you do manipulate minutes, you're doing it with a higher per minute rate than what he put up last year. Yabusel did not come up. I think somebody asked about him earlier. 0% on FanDuel, 1.3% on DraftKings at 3,000. That could change. I gave him 17 before, but maybe things change around. Probably not, but we'll see. Mama's building $1 million prop. Chan Zero's here. Ask Chan all your Acemind questions. Acemind.io, by the way. If you guys want to run these sims yourself, get these results yourselves, Acemind.io. Check them out. Promo code Rotoscouts, all in caps, gets you 20% off your first month over there. And they're running a promo code that gets you 25. So put those things together. Well, you can't put them together, but put it together in your head and use theirs because it's a bigger discount. Chan will tell you what that promo code is. Escaping me right now. And check out Rotoscouts.com. That's how you get access to all my projections, all my content. Every data point, every single sport is under $1 a day, all in. So that gives you access to every sport. Not all in per sport, all in, all access, every sport, one price, under $1 a day, weekly, monthly, and quarterly plans available. Tip off, there it is. I'll run a promo code at some point for Rotoscouts, but I feel like the value's there already. But we'll throw one out there. I've got one in mind that I mentioned on I think on a baseball show. Also had something in my eye just now. I'm not crying for having to leave you guys here at 6:20. Other relevant plays before we break. We talked Mobley a little bit. Jarrett Allen, center and power forward, 46% on the FanDuel slate. That's pretty significant. Not really a significant piece of DraftKings at all. 0.67%, less than the field. But that doesn't mean that the field's off and running with that play. That's, single-digit ownership by the field. It's going to be the same thing even with this hard red against Trace Jackson Davis here. We're not dealing with monster projections for him. On FanDuel for 4,700, he does look like he clawed to a little bit of center ownership, 10% center ownership over there. As far as let me do this. Just because it's relevant and because I did answer that question before about liking to think about the center spot on FanDuel this way. Just curious, among our center-only guys, it's kind of spread out, and that is 84% of the positional ownership is going to center-only guys, but the highest owned guy in the top 150 across the center-only guys is Miles Turner at just 19%. So there's no one significant standout pay up or value center on the FanDuel slate. And honestly, it does look kind of like you could get away if you got good power forwards in mind with slotting like Jarrett Allen into that center spot. It might not necessarily return this exact same kind of a value. He might be a better utility in the power forward. And that's what, as you look at the sim lineup results, which we'll do on other shows, that's what will inform you on that. We talked about that with Blaine yesterday. When I asked him, all right, let's scroll down. Show me how much, as we scroll down, how far down did we have to go before we got a Naz Reid in center rather than in power forward? I'd ask the same question against Jarrett Allen here. How much of that 46 is in center versus power forward? So that's where it gets interesting to scroll through those lineups. But that's a pretty big meatball there. You got 26 going to Evan Mobley in that same front court. Pairing those two guys, never my favorite thing, but I don't think it's something that you have to necessarily rope off either because both those guys capable of getting there at the same time. Zion out? Or are you just saying subject to when the Zion news comes? Chan was getting KJ Martin a lot on DK, it sounds like, in the Sims. Yabusel, Clark, and Quickly up there. Okay, so we saw those guys. We got Clark right here. What am I sorted by? So, all right, this is by the raw exposure. So, yeah, IQ right there. The top raw exposure in our 150 on DraftKings overall at 65. Got a lot of Nick Richards, but that could change with some of those other big men values emerging. But at center only for 4,000, I'm kind of interested in that spot. Here's Brandon Clark, who just got mentioned for 3,700, a little bit cheaper. Came up 29% of the time from me. I've probably got him a little bit. I've probably got that projection the other way around than what Chan is using. He's using his, I think. Maybe he's not. Who else we talking? Zion ruled out, confirmed. All right. So with that in mind then, since it's 6:25, let me punch out of here, guys. Hit the subscribe button, or hit the like button, hit the subscribe bell, jump over to rotoscouts.com, sign up for a plan, jump over to acemind.io, sign up for access to all their great sim and optimizer tools. And we'll be right back tomorrow with a basketball show during the afternoon. Only a 4-game slate if memory serves tomorrow, so it'll be a little bit easier to get a 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon show going. So think about that time tomorrow, and then we'll do a football showdown show. It's already Thursday. I can't believe it. Haven't even dove into football projections yet. I'll be working on that overnight tonight. Good luck out there. Somebody go win something. We'll see you tomorrow.